go first, Greg, and so you have lots of controversial opinions that can.
Right. Do you want to,
Greg?
Right.
What will be our topic today?
Okay, I think we've agreed that we'll have 5 minutes each to discuss the idea of, on the 17th of August, the 17 Agustus, Bahasa Indonesia or Bahasa English? What are we using?
It's up to you. Bahasa Inggris and Bahasa
campur or?
Indonesia.
English is
English.
English.
Oh, this one is English.
It's English. Okay.
This is English channel.
Probably you're making converted directly to Indonesian.
Yeah.
Can you do that live? Yeah, I suppose you
Yes.
can. Right. So in English or Australian, 5 minutes. Stop rewind.
It's already.
Where is Indonesia now? Because the 17th of August is a good time to do a stock take. It's the National Celebration Day, the celebration of independence. And I guess the real question is, on the 17th of August, we ask, how independent is Indonesia? And me, as a famous economist, I always remember in his latter years, Sukarno was always saying that don't be satisfied with just being independent. We have to mengisi kemerdekaan. We have to fill and make sure that our independence has some substance to it. So not just getting the Dutchman out of the palace, but controlling our own finances, having a free and independent foreign policy, being able to trade with who we want to trade, to make relationships with who we want to make relationships on Indonesian terms, and in the interest of Indonesia, not in the interests of our various alliances. And I guess that's the point I say. How free is Indonesia at the moment? And it's an argument. Indonesia is still a leading figure in the non-bloc movement. Certainly the policies are still to be free and independent, to be unallied. On the surface, you see a fairly good balance. Indonesia is accused of getting too close to China, but in the tuna, we set up the Navy to the tuna when the Chinese get a bit close. Said, no, that's ours. On the other side, we're still buying stuff from America. Sometimes we appear to be compromising with America. It's in the issue now. There's been a big issue at the moment about America losing face in the Gulf of Hormuz, where it cannot control that choke point. And basically, I think they've given up on trying to stop the Iranians from controlling Hormuz. But plan B seems to be the Malacca Straits, which are a very significant passageway, narrower, and flyover rights of the Malaccas, oh dear, would give the Americans significant power. And the key to that is not to have to ask permission from Indonesia to fly over those straits. So the status of that equation is significant. How that goes will affect my view of how independent Indonesia is. From a trading point of view, America's trading has still got a slight overtone of colonial exploitation is the way they like to trade. You give it to us and we'll give you some back if we have to, sort of. Like, a bit like the way they deal with Venezuelan oil. We sell all your oil, and if you're nice guys, we'll give you some of your money back at our discretion, and which is really the old imperial type model. The Chinese, whatever else they are, they don't deal on that basis. They create economies of scale all around the world. They want people to be prosperous because they understand that the friends they build in building infrastructure, etc., when the infrastructure is in place, they've got a debt to China, right? But their debts are at half the price of World Bank or IMF. And also they build up relationships during that process. And then they build up an economy. If they're exploiting a coal or iron ore or whatever in Africa, by the time those resources are established, they've got a long-term, solid relationship with China. And the money that's brought into the economy by the exploitation of their own resources on their own terms means that they are now capable of consuming the sort of production that China is producing. And China, of course, becomes the supplier of choice because their cars are better and cheaper, their soft goods, their fridges, their refrigerators, the stuff that China builds is better and cheaper. All that China needs to do to sell it is to create a market, i.e. poor, suffering, exploited Africans build their own industry, get educated. That's a long-term plan, which America is totally incapable of doing. It's outside of their conceptual analysis. But China will invest long-term, build up an economy, create wealth in that economy, understand that's a win-win, because when they have the wealth, they will become a good market for Chinese goods. That also is what I'd like to see here in Indonesia. Work closer with China, because they will help build you up, help make you wealthier, and trust you will buy stuff from China, which is the best value stuff in the world. Don't be like the Philippines, which I would say has recently regressed. They were building fast high-speed rails in the Philippines. As soon as Marcos got the power, his first program was to cancel the high-speed rail, and the second thing he did was to rebuild the Clark Air Force Base and the Subic Bay for navals, which I don't think are actually very useful to the Philippines. But from the American strategic point of view, they are very good for helping poke China in the eye, and I dare say that America would be very happy if the Philippines, in conjunction with Taiwan and Japan perhaps, could create some antipathy towards China and spark an incident. Ideally, it would be on the scale of Ukraine stirring up Russia. And America can sit back, provide all the goods and lend the money and have a wonderful time dealing in arms and creating havoc around the world, which is historically a wonderful profit centre for America. A very cynical view of the world, perhaps, but if my time's running out, am I? I don't have my time. I think it's all right. But that basically is where I see the major challenge for Indonesia. Are you totally non-bloc independent? In which case, Logos would dictate that you would get closer to China because it's a better win for you than being egalitarian just with America. Because America will exploit. That's what they're designed to do. They've got an old imperial colonial type attitude, and that will not serve you to be very close to that. It won't serve your interests because it comes out of threat. You're nice to America because you're worried what they'll do to you if they don't. You're nice to China because they can do lots of nice good things for you, and they don't do so on the back of a threat. They do so on a win-win. No, it's not a zero-sum game proposition like it is for America. And maybe I've repeated myself. I would like to see, as Indonesia now takes stock of where it is and plans to let it go, non-aligned of sure, but in a non-aligned situation, logically and rationally, you would now be more focused on putting your interests into China, which looks like if the world is going to have a future, it will be in China. If their world of future is dependent on America, it will be exploitive, it will return to empire, it will return to the worst of what was put up with in the 19th and 18th centuries. So I hope that China and Indonesia get closer together for the sake of both China and Indonesia and the world. Sekian lah saudara sekalian.
Thank you, Pak Greg. So Pak Greg basically showing that Indonesia in the Independence Day, 81 years after Indonesian independence, Indonesia should take position as non-bloc country, should closer to China than to United States. And he gives some historical lesson on what happened in Philippines. That's, I think, one of the key takeaway from Pak Greg. And I like to ask two of our guests today, speaker, Pak John Hargrave and Kevin Evans, going to comment on this. Floor is yours.
Bruce doesn't want to know. Okay, well, thank you to Greg for that exciting introduction and then some interesting topics to think about and talk about. So I can say a little bit about those topics. I think I want to start on the domestic issue of Indonesia and the 81 years of independence, because rightly as Monday is Independence Day, so we're all thinking about that. I think the point I would like to make about that always strikes me on Independence Day is that Indonesians are very keen to proclaim their independence and they shout Merdeka, Merdeka. But to me, often it seems that the Indonesian government itself is not so much a government that has brought freedom for the people of Indonesia, but rather that the Indonesian government is reproducing the same kinds of oppression that were practiced by the Dutch during the colonial period. And I see that particularly today with the government of Prabowo. I find that the government of Prabowo is very top-down in its approach. It's has a very hierarchical, authoritarian system. Prioritizes close control using the armed forces, using the police, using the military. And that, to me, is not true independence or true freedom for the Indonesian people. It's a pretense of freedom where effectively the colonial system of oppressive authoritarian government has been replaced by a system, or not even replaced by a different system, but it's the same system, just with the top leaders are now Indonesians rather than being Dutch colonial governors and so on. So I do see that as a problem. I think that the direction that Prabowo has taken the country in over the last 2 years has been very unfortunate. He's clearly keen on promoting military culture in many aspects of Indonesian society, and the Indonesian government. I'll give one example, for example, is the Koperasi Desa. Now, this is promoted as Koperasi Desa, as somehow it's a collective, it's for the benefit of the poor people, all these kind of things. But in fact, the whole idea has not involved the poor people at all. The whole idea has come from Prabowo. It's mainly implemented by the military. It involves the military going into kampungs and stealing land and occupying land, which is being used previously by villages as football fields or as farmland or for other purposes. They seize the land, they occupy it, they collect money from the villages in just the same way as taxes are collected, using government authority to take money from the people. And at the moment, there's no guarantee that the people are going to get that money back. So effectively, they're being forced to invest energy, land, and finance in a project that the return is very uncertain. So how do we know that the Koperasi Desa is going to actually deliver any profits or deliver any benefits to the people? It may well not do. And we can, as a comparison, you can just look at the MBG, the Makan Bergizi Gratis, which is a very similar kind of program, introduced with a lot of fanfare based on Prabowo's personal whims, rather than with proper planning. The allocation of contracts for the supply of food, for the management of distribution, everything to do with the financing of the MBG has been passed by the government to Prabowo's cronies and supporters. And so it's not surprising that there's corruption, as we know already, and the chairman of the Makan Bergizi Gratis program was forced to resign because of corruption. Then he was replaced by someone else, and the second person resigned because there were concerns about corruption again. Now that person has been replaced, and supposedly the third person who's come in is going to somehow clean it up. But the problems of the MBG were put in right at the beginning when the project was imposed in a time framework that was too short, without any serious planning, without any proper tenders for most of the contracts to supply the food. And so this whole kind of top-down version of government that Prabowo has imposed, using the force of the police and the military, and obviously he is by nature he is aesthetically attracted to military culture, let us say. So the idea of everyone dancing around or marching around, perhaps I should say, wearing military fatigues appeals to him, hence the training of the Koperasi Desa managers who were forced to dress up as soldiers and then do exhausting physical training, which has no relevance to their actual function as managers of Koperasi Desa, but does kind of imbue them with a certain militaristic aesthetic and a militaristic culture, and then people end up dying of heart attacks and various other problems because of that. But anyway, I'm digressing slightly from the main issue. But clearly, this approach to government, it seems to me, is I don't want to say at all that it's like the forced cultivation which was imposed by the Dutch colonials in the 19th century, because it's clearly not as bad as that. But it does have some similarities in the sense that the people who are sovereign here are not actually the Indonesian people as a whole, or who are villagers, who, as I said, in some cases are having their land taken away from them, having this project imposed on them without any say or any ability to participate in the planning process, and the wealth ultimately is extracted, and in some cases, as I've said, the wealth, as in the case of the MBG, the money is taken out of the government education budget and ends up being distributed to the president's cronies and other beneficiaries in certain political parties that have sold their support to the government in exchange for these economic favors that benefit their supporters, but do not necessarily directly benefit the supposed poor people, the hungry people, the stunted people, and so on, who are nominally the beneficiaries of these programs. So that on a domestic level, I do see that as one of the problems with Indonesian independence, and one that I think needs to be changed. And so I think from an Indonesian perspective, it would be good if more Indonesians took more seriously the idea of Merdeka, not just as a slogan, but in terms of what does Merdeka really mean in terms of freedom, in terms of public participation, in terms of the ability of the ordinary people to not be dominated, not be repressed, not be controlled by ruling political parties or by a ruling government, whether it be a militaristic Indonesian government or a Dutch colonial government or whatever kind of government it is, there needs to be a discussion and an understanding of what is meant by merdeka. And that has not happened in the 81 years of independence for various political reasons and so on. For one obvious example would be the 1965 massacre of communists, and obviously the massacre of hundreds of thousands of people, which took place in the 1960s, you can say is a national trauma, which has never effectively been confronted or addressed by subsequent generations, and generations since 1965 have lived simultaneously with the trauma of having communities that have been destroyed, parents, grandparents, older generations that have been killed, families that have been decimated or effectively massacred, and that trauma is one thing that's never been addressed. And also at the same time, the kind of culture of suppression of the truth, the culture of lies that was built up by Suharto in order to prevent that discussion, has led to an ongoing inheritance during the reform period, where people are afraid to criticize, afraid to express opinions, and that has impoverished the discussion of the possibilities for Indonesian independence, I think. And so unfortunately now we see a situation where Prabowo is actually reviving many of the kind of new order stereotypes when he talks about things like antek asing. This is something that's throwback to the Suharto era, the same kind of trying to taint any critic as being a stooge for foreign interest and all this kind of stuff, which is the same tactic as Suharto. Also, incidentally, I will point out that involving the police, the military, and so on in village projects, for example, involving the military in food estate projects in order to grow food for villages, is also a tactic that was used during the period of communist versus military confrontation in the 1960s. And at that time, the communists who were kind of active at the village level, building farmers' cooperatives and so on, were seen as in competition with the army. So the army went into direct competition by also getting themselves involved in food projects, helping the farmers, supporting food production, being involved in village life at that level at the same in the same way, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But we can see that today, as Greg has kind of alluded, the world is very different, and using the army to grow food or to be involved in projects at the village level is not really appropriate. It's a misuse of the military resources at a time when the world is very dangerous. The army and all the armed forces in Indonesia need modernization to confront the unstable global situation, the danger of war in the South China Sea, war in the Philippine Sea, war in Selat Malacca, and other things that Greg mentioned in his speech. At the moment, I don't see any kind of serious effort by the Indonesian government to build the strength in cyber security or in the Air Force or in the Navy to resist those things. And what we see instead is Prabowo building territorial battalions to spread large numbers of land-based soldiers in places like Papua, in other islands, not to secure the nation, but in order to secure the government's control over the peasants, as you might call them, who are the local farmers. In Papua, you might call them the victims of neo-colonial occupation. So I think this is a misuse of the military power that the government is undertaking under Prabowo, and his government is going to step backwards in terms of, in almost every respect, economic, political, in terms of human rights, in terms of vision, in terms of intelligent discussion of what the future of Indonesia really needs in order to make Indonesians wealthy, prosperous, free, healthy, and to enable the people of Indonesia, many of them long poor and long suffering, to live better lives. So that's a perspective on the domestic issue. So perhaps switching to the international perspective, as I just spoke about Greg's point, which was that there's a lot of danger now, the situation in the South China Sea, the situation in the Strait of Malacca, which has been taken for granted, you might say, for decades. So what has happened? Well, I think for Greg is obviously, you might say, pro-Chinese and anti-American. I'm based on my understanding, more pro-American and less pro-Chinese. Why that? Because I have seen in the past, I would say that the USA in general has promoted freedom and human rights, although I won't say they obviously they're hypocritical to a certain extent. But for example, to take an example, in Indonesia, Jimmy Carter, who was the president of the United States in the 1970s, was active in helping to secure the freedom of some of the political prisoners who were held in Buru Island and other places at that time. And people such as Prundi Anantatur, Indonesia's greatest literary figure and novelist, who was held as a political prisoner for many years on Buru Island, was released in the 1970s, partly because of pressure from the Indonesian government. I can see I've been speaking for too long, so let me just keep this short. So basically, the point I'm making is that in the past, America did support freedom to some extent, although there were also elements of hypocrisy. However, I agree with Greg that the situation is very different now. Donald Trump has abandoned the American support for human rights or concern about human rights. He's abandoned American support for the idea of supplying global security, securing international free passage during waterways and this kind of thing, free passage across the oceans, which was a centerpiece of or a key point of American foreign policy, and a benefit which was often overlooked by the countries such as Indonesia, which benefited from that free passage. And he's abandoned free trade and the World Trade Organization and all these things, which made a huge difference, were a huge benefit for the world since 1945 up until very recently. Those things have been abandoned by Trump, and the situation has completely changed. Trump is a narcissist, he's an egoist, he's a racist. He is focused on the financial benefit of himself, his cronies, his family, the people around him. He sees everything in transactional terms, in terms of short-term deals. He has no vision. So he has created a very unstable situation. One example being the invasion of Iran. Not the invasion of Iran, but anyway, the war on Iran and the tax and the resultant closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So how does that affect Indonesia? It means that Indonesia has to take a position. At the moment, again, I have to criticize President Prabowo. I think his foreign policy is very much similar to Trump. It is erratic, it is personalized, it is not based on a proper long-term vision, it is not based on proper consultation with authoritative people. In the case of Prabowo, for example, he has a lot of good people working as diplomats in the foreign ministry. He doesn't consult them, he comes out with nonsense. For example, he said the other week that Iran already has a nuclear weapon, which is completely misstating one of the most fundamental issues in world affairs that is directly related to the threat that Greg was speaking about. And so when the president is coming out with such nonsense and talking such nonsense about such an important issue for Indonesian people and for the whole world, in fact, that does not speak well for the Indonesia's foreign policy. And the president in Indonesia, just like the president in America, needs to consult with real experts. In the American case, we can see that Trump has no option to consult with real experts because he's fired anyone who knew anything or had a serious policy. So he only has cronies like Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio, who are basically in agreement with him and willing to say whatever he wants them to say. So they're never going to challenge him or come up with an independent strategy. So in that situation, clearly Indonesia has a difficult situation. It doesn't need to steer between the US and China. There is a danger in getting close to the USA, giving America free flight over to Selat Malacca, for example. That would be a big mistake. I don't think Indonesia should do that because it is definitely taking sides rather than de-escalating the conflict between America and China. It is escalating it. I don't think that China is as beneficent as Greg portrayed it. I don't think their loans are free. For example, in Sri Lanka, they loan lots of money to Sri Lanka, and then they use the high debt repayments as a way to claim assets in Sri Lankan ports and so on. The Wush train itself is a current example in Indonesia, financed by China. What's happened now? The Wush project is all in debt, provided the finance minister wants to take it over, using government money to pay off debts to China that were incurred as a result of the bad deal that was made in the first place. So both China and the US are, you might say, neo-colonials to a certain extent, and all countries, including Indonesia, need to be very wary, just like my country, the UK, needs to be very wary. In the case of the UK, which is a long-time ally of the US, the obvious solution is to forge a closer alliance with the European partners in the European Union, a closer defense alliance, a closer economic alliance, and so on. But unfortunately, the UK has gone in the wrong direction for the last 10 years. Hopefully, they can correct course. In the case of Indonesia, it needs to maintain its strong position in ASEAN. I don't think it should separate from ASEAN and go off on its own, as the President Prabowo seems to want it to do. It needs the ballast of ASEAN to give it strength in world affairs, to give it strength to its position. I do think Indonesia faces a difficult situation. And I do apologize to any viewers or listeners who are getting bored listening to me, and to the AI summarizer who's having struggled to keep up with
just noted
what I'm saying. So I'll stop at that point and let others contribute some ideas.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. So, thank you for your comment. So, when we start today agenda with Greg, so Pak Greg explained what should reflection for 81-year anniversary of Indonesian independence. And Pak Greg already start with what should Indonesian position in geopolitical stage. Should Indonesia closer to China or United States? Pak John Hargrave continue the discussion, but it goes directly to what happened in Indonesian domestic. There is more critical evaluation on what happened with Prabowo administration. The Prabowo administration, two key program of Prabowo is Koperasi Desa Merah Putih and then MBG, makan bergizi gratis or free meal program. So it's critical evaluation of John Hargrave, and then later John is also commenting on what in geopolitics, Indonesian position in the world, and then later other lot of variety topic. But it's good because at the end of the day, we can ask the AI moderator to cut some of the content and put it into different channel, something like that. That's why it's okay as long as we have a content to be recorded. And the issue of WUS, which is more on financial issue and economic, that was already speech by Pak Prabowo today in, I think, in DPR.
Oh, really? Very interesting.
I think so. I think that
I missed that.
His speech is about APBN, I think so. That's what happened today. And now we want to have more comment from our guest speaker, which is more used to be found in Indonesian news, in Indonesian television, Pak Kevin Evans. Your comments on Indonesian. Oops. Yes. Continue.
Let me begin. Dirgahayu, Republic Indonesia, 81 years young. I think we talked a little about the broader foreign policy or the regional dynamics, and I think we frequently referred to two superpowers. I think, in fact, it's becoming much more interesting than that. I remember when I was even at high school, people had begun to talk about the possibility that one day we would go back to a multipolar world rather than a bipolar world. And I think that's finally beginning to happen, partly because of the race to autarky by the United States. And I think the operationalization of a very transactional model has simply meant it's not a reliable partner. So countries that have had a long-standing partnership with that country, and I would include places like Australia and most of Europe, are simply now having to learn to deal with the fact that they don't have a reliable partner anymore and will increasingly have to chart their own course. And so what I imagine will be one of the early wins will be the Europeans actually becoming a more effective unit in terms of policy, economic integration and so forth. And what's fascinated me is how quickly it's been possible for trade negotiations, for example, between Australia and Europe or Indonesia and Europe that had been ongoing for many years with no resolution in sight, all of a sudden we're now quickly able to come to a conclusion. So I think in some respects for Europe, we may sit back 20 years from now and say the dissociation from the United States was a good thing for the nation or whatever it will be of Europe. And so that would be one extra group that I think we'll all be navigating between and around, in addition, of course, to Japan as a major economic force. And I think looking ahead 10, 15, 20 years, I would say the same for India. And both of our countries, Australia and Indonesia, have had the great fortune of enjoying the very great rise of the Asia Pacific over the past couple of generations. We're also very fortunate to be on the coastline of the Indian Ocean emergence, which will also bring in the nations of Africa as important players in the global economy over the next generation. But certainly India, I would imagine, will emerge as a very important player in its own right, certainly over the next generation. So that's will be a dynamic we're all going to have to face, notably middle powers like Australia and Indonesia. I think there's an interesting opportunity. If some of the great powers are behaving rather recklessly or unilaterally, whether it's bullying in the Spratly Islands or whether it's bullying in the Straits of Hormuz or whether it's bullying in Ukraine, but the major powers appear to be a little out of control, if you can put it that way. And so it may now be a time for the middle powers, who seem in general to be much more committed to things like rules-based order. And I write Canada into that picture as well, taking an intellectual lead, I think, in opening people's eyes to the fact that the wistful hopes of returning to an era that we used to know a few years ago is not going to come back. And perhaps to call us out and to say, was it really that great anyway? And so I think some useful introspection is required on that. But I think it's an interesting opportunity emerging for medium powers to actually work together. And hopefully they, so you would add Australia and Indonesia certainly as two, who are certainly closely associated with one another. Then you would look at places like Japan and Europe as well, to be able to perhaps collectively, Canada, to perhaps collectively be able to exert greater influence on the situation to ensure the bigger powers behave themselves a little more appropriately and not behave just because the gorillas in the discussion will do as they like. In some respects, Indonesia, I think, is in a slightly beneficial position in being able to navigate between the shores, because that's what it's always done. The notion of not being aligned has always, the people always talk about, 1,000 friends, no enemies. Of course, what it really means is you've got 1,000 Facebook friends, not real friends, because there's no real commitment there. But what it's also meant is you've had to chart your own course. And so you do deals with the Chinese on investment, you do deals with the Americans on defense, you do deals with somebody else on something else. So you can package and identify how you want to work to a means that you see as in your own national interest. Whereas perhaps Australia, traditionally having been full bore with one team, as it were, right or wrong, that team, so technology, yes, defense, yes, trade, yes. Now we may also have to start to learn, well, maybe we have to be a little bit more nuanced and subtle in how we engage with different partners. And maybe a traditional expectation from traditional partners may no longer be a guarantee that you would want to put your nation's trust into. So I think all of these developments are really offer some interesting wake-ups. It's not going to be a pleasant or easy situation. And perhaps I might throw in another little curveball here, is the changing relationship between a country like Israel and its traditional friends, all of whom, I think it would be fair to say, are absolutely horrified by what's been going on as this country has thrashed, bashed, burnt, bombed everybody in the neighbourhood, and is now looking to extend that beyond to countries traditionally seen as its friends, like Turkey, which have always had a very good relationship with that country. So now they're sort of raising the I don't know what you say in Hebrew for jihad, but to raise the angst against or their fear and loathing or whatever towards Turkey. But I think what I see happening there is increasingly that country will find itself facing similar kinds of ostracism as faced South Africa in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, until major transformation occurred in that society. And I have a feeling that's exactly where this country is going. The traditional leaderships in the countries, in these traditionally friendly countries, are all in an incredible quandary, because their electorates have simply said no more dealing with these people. But traditionally they've always had relationships and friendships and whatever. And so extricating from that is a quite wrenching process, I think, in a number of these things, perhaps the United States more than most others. But it's very clear, I think, going back to the kind of relationships that used to exist, that's now gone. And this is going to increasingly be a rogue or pariah state until a major transformation occurs within that society itself. And so we may revisit this whole fanciful notion of two-state solution, which quite clearly I think is a lazy person's way of trying to explain or hope for an answer that frankly isn't going to be in front of us. Another kind of answer is going to have to come forward. But that country is going to face considerable difficulties of its own making, and how they begin to themselves come to terms with the fact that you can't bomb your way into security. You've somehow got to actually build some actual friendships. And we're 81 years old here. I think that country will be 80 years next year. After 80 years, still having no real friends among your neighbours is perhaps something that's worthy of some reflection in trying to recalibrate a new path forward for your people, and of course those people you occupy, and so forth as well. So I think that's maybe where I see the situation at the moment as we become 81 years old on Monday. Merdeka.
Merdeka.
Merdeka. Thank you, Pak Kevin Evans. So he got a lot of experience working for United Nations and travel around the world, including the Middle East. That's why the story of what happened in Palestine and in Israel, and the story for Indonesia. So we have good advantage today, because all the three speakers are actually Indonesia called expatriate, but living more than 30-40 years in Indonesia. So they can speak Bahasa very well. Only for this discussion, every month we met here in Pak Greg home to discuss current affair and geopolitical affair. And today, to show that I'm not going to summarize what our discussion is or what the content of our discussion, but I'm going to ask Pak Greg to make summarize in Bahasa, to show off that we, all the expatriates, can speak Indonesia well and understand well. So, Pak Greg. And also closing.
Oke,
in Bahasa.
dalam bahasa Indonesia.
Ya.
Terima kasih atas kehormatan yang diberikan saya. Mudah-mudahan saya bisa memenuhi aspirasi dan keyakinan daripada Pak Oni. Memang tadi kami ngomong cukup panjang lebar dari mungkin 3 sudut panjang sudut pandang yang berbeda-beda. Saya mulai dengan banyak menyoroti mungkin boleh bilang garis besarnya dari keadaan secara umum internasional Indonesia, bagaimana posisi Indonesia, terutama dari sudut pandang sebagai anggota non-block movement dan salah satu perintis daripada the non-block movement. Saya cukup prihatin lihat perkembangannya bahwa bukan lagi saatnya bagi saya untuk hanya netral, karena ada satu kekuatan yang sudah jelas mengancam kestabilan internasional secara yang bisa main perang-perangan yang adalah modalnya. Satu lagi kekuatan yang main dagang-dagang sebebas-bebasnya untuk memperjuangkan aspirasinya. Bagi saya yang mau main aspirasinya, memperjuangkan aspirasinya dengan dagang-dagang seluas-luasnya, justru ini yang menguntungkan Indonesia jauh lebih daripada yang bercenderung mengutamakan kekuasaan militer. Dari itu sudut pandang saya. Pak John, dia konsentrasinya lihat banyak kekurangan dalam administrasi negara Indonesia yang selama ini menimbul sejak naik tata daripada si Pak Prabowo, cenderung untuk semakin banyak kekuasaan militer, untuk pengendalian rakyat yang lebih ketat daripada dulu-dulu, juga korupsi yang agak merajalela selama beberapa tahun terakhir, yang bagi saya bukan sesuatu yang baru. Kekuasaan lokal, kekuatan-kekuatan yang punya pusat-pusat macam-macam di seluruh Indonesia yang berbeda-beda. Itu saya bilang mungkin masalah yang intensitasnya bisa berbeda-beda, tapi itu satu masalah pokok di seluruh Indonesia memang sejak lama adanya. Masalah bagi saya tetap lebih besar lagi kalau Indonesia sudah lama berjuangkan sudut pasangnya daripada si korupsi, kekuatan korupsi, tapi negara-negara yang gagal total di dunia selama 50 tahun terakhir, Libya, Syria, Irak, Afghanistan, ada negara-negara lain yang gagal bukan karena korupsi dan segala macam kelemahan dalam negeri. Salah satu negara yang terkenal paling korup di dunia adalah Ukraina. Sekurup-kurupnya Ukraina waktu menjelang tahun 1914, sekurup-kurupnya jauh lebih jorok nasib rata-rata orang Ukraina sewaktu ditolong dari pihak luar. Dari itu yang mungkin saya bilang, saya tetap memeringatkan bahwa pertolongan dari pihak luar akan mengacaukan. Karena pihak luar tidak punya kepentingan memperbaiki. Omong-omongnya kita prihatin karena Gaddafi kasih Viagra untuk memperkosa orangnya. Irak mau bunuh orangnya sendiri. Semua itu kan lagu lama lah dari pihak asing yang mengintervensikan. Jangan harap itu dengan satu macam altruism, karena benar cari kepentingan sendiri. So that's tetap pendirian. Disinggung soal pinjaman duit, faktanya China memang kasih pinjaman ke Sri Lanka yang contohnya, tapi pinjaman uangnya itu separuh daripada pinjaman daripada World Bank atau dari IMF, dan rata-rata China royal dalam kasih investasi yang cukup murah karena mereka betul-betul mengharapkan perkembangan ekonomi lokal dengan yang saya sudah jelaskan dulu. Tapi saya setuju dengan penilaian dari Pak John bahwa banyak perkembangan Indonesia memang dipengaruhi dari si Pak Kim tinggal mau dengar saja ini mau kabut. Okay, to next time. Okay, see you, mate. Pak Kim dia ambil sudut pandang yang ketiga. Dia tidak lihat cuman besar-besaran yang saya lihat kepentingan non-blok gitu-gituan, maupun cuman keadaan yang banyak kekurangan lokal dengan program gizi, dengan program koperasi desa segala macam. Tapi dia lebih nyemorotin bahwa dunia sejak kemerdekaan waktu itu bipolar, yang kekuatan Rusia melawan kekuatan Amerika. Sekarang pusat kekuatan lain, dia sebut bagaimana perkembangannya. Kanada yang mulai dihitung, India yang mulai dihitung, Afrika yang dia juga bilang adalah sesuatu kekuatan yang mulai dihitung. Itu juga sesuai dengan penilaian saya, mungkin karena dengan analisis saya mengenai si Burkina Faso dan Ibrahim Traore. Dan sejak itu sudah mungkin 6 bulan yang lalu, kalau lihat perkembangannya yang jarang disebut dalam pers Indonesia maupun pers asing, itu suatu harapan dunia di mana kita banyak frustrasi lihat Irak, lihat Iran, lihat Filipina, lihat banyak negara yang Ukraina yang di mana kasihan delo. Tapi kalau lihat Burkina Faso berkembang, sekarang tidak mau mengimpor lagi makanan, sudah mulai bisa menjaga kepentingan diri sendiri tanpa bantuan militer negara lain. Banyak bisa berdiri atas kaki sendiri, berdikari kalau pinjam istilahnya Bung Karno. Itu agak disinggung dari Pak Kev bahwa sekarang ada pusat-pusat kekuatan lagi yang sudah meniadakan penilaian bahwa itu cuma bipolar. Dunia ini punya berbagai macam kekuatan dan dia juga sebut bahwa Indonesia berkebetulan Indonesia ada posisi yang baik untuk ambil untung dari perkembangan itu. Nah, itu juga saya setuju dengan si analisa Pak Kev di situ. Mungkin saya ringkaskan cuma sampai di situ aja. Mungkin saya bisa mengundang, mungkin Pak John atau Pak Oni kalau ada sesuatu yang saya kurang meliputi atau kalau merasa saya kurang mengangkat omongan Pak John ya monggo.
Pak Greg, yang paling penting hari ini kita harus bilang 81 tahun Indonesia
merdeka. Hidup Bung Karno.
Jadi John Hargrave merdeka.
Merdeka!
Yang ingin saya tunjukkan, what I have to show to audience that actually all the speaker today, they can speak, they can fluently give their perspective on what happened in the world, what happened in Indonesia, using English as their mother language. At the same time, they can speak bahasa Indonesia, also near native. That's what happened.
Nuhun, Pak.
Oh, thank you.
Pujian.
So at the closing of our video, Merdeka.
Merdeka. Thank you, Brian, for your contribution.
Thank you for attending our meeting today, and we will see you again in the next month.
Oke, kalau mulai kangen sementara, saya ajak untuk lihat saya punya proyek baru. Ini iklan gratis yo.
Yep.
Saya punya proyek baru. Saya sudah bikin YouTube channel sendiri.
Oh,
Namanya Bule Andara. Saya membahas kerukunan agama, juga nilai politik dan ya jadi seperti pun begini. Tapi bukan orang pintar yang saya omong rakyat biasa di Jalan Andara. Monggo. Thank you for the kesempatan cari iklan gratis ya.
Thank you, Pak Greg. Thank you, Pak John.
Thank you and everybody.
Sekian saudara sekalian.
What is this, Pak Oni? Is this a microphone or something?
Yes, that's microphone.
Sekali udara tetap baru.
Is it live? Is it recording me or us?
No, it recording everyone who gets